I'm not crippled.
Videotape?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's right, tell them, Mom.
Tell
Tell them, Mom. Hang in front of the
Jimmy's
Don't put me
next.
there too fast. No. Okay, and I hope, I'm not gonna take
No
too
more
long.
tears.
It's terrible
Take all the time.
Wait.
as a speaker, not good as a speaker.
Now, you wasn't terrible as a speaker when I was growing up.
Just talking to your kids.
That was at home.
Spoke just fine to us.
Yeah, you didn't have.
I ain't putting
You didn't have to say it all, did you, Mama?
Bend over.
You probably heard that a lot.
If you go to the
I
bed
did hear
springs,
it a lot.
if you grab all the bed springs, I'm gonna get a broom and
I
poke
don't
you out.
I told you not to do that.
Darren used to.
Okay, everybody listen to Grandma.
Okay, I wanna, if I get emotional, she'll have to bear with me.
Get emotional, Mom.
You get emotional with me.
I get emotional.
Emotional.
Jessica.
When Jimmy said what he did, actually, that's so true. But if you spend a lot of time with your children, it's very important. And I've told our children many times, the ones that I'm around most, it's very important to eat a meal with your children.
Right.
You know what? Most people stick something on the table, they eat it by themselves, they go their way, and they never sit down and eat a meal, hardly ever, with their children. And that's very important. My husband really believed in that. He said if you could do it at least one time a day. And Lena, bless her heart, she's at my house most of the time. Riley is too, but Lena's real small, but she will ask me and beg me to please sit down with her at the table. And she wants me to sit there the whole time she's eating, and I do try to do that. But what Jimmy said earlier, that is in the Bible, in Joshua, it talks about stones for a memorial. And that's what Jimmy's talking about. You have these stones that the children can look back to. And that is so important that they have something that they can look back to. And when I was thinking today about that, and in Joshua, where the Lord told Joshua to have the different tribes to take a stone out of the river, and I think they took 12 stones for each tribe, and they built a memorial so that when the children ask about them, what are these stones for? Then the families would tell the children, and it would pass down. Do you know how important that is? One reason that our society is in such a terrible shape, there's nothing they don't pass down important things to the children. They'll do whatever it is they do in their homes, they do it, and they really don't pay too much attention to the children. So there's really nothing there that they're building for those children. And when they get older, what do they have to look back to? Like Jimmy said, they have to have something to look back to that's important to them. And that is, when I was young, I really don't have anything hardly that I can really look back to. I don't have it. And it affects you. You don't realize how much it affects you in a lot of ways when you're growing up, and it's something that you never, it's just something there that you never can grasp because you don't have that to look back on. But I will have to say, after I got married, my husband, because of the way he was raised with his uncles and his grandmother and everything in the country, he helped me so much with a lot of stuff. I didn't know anything about being patriotic, or there was just a lot of things I did not know. And when he came into my life, he showed me a lot of things that was important to me and has stayed important to me up until this time. And we have passed that down to our children, some of it, because it's very important that if you just knew as a young parent how important it is to pass these things down to your children, and they will remember. I try to tell the two girls here, I have them in the home a lot, and then if I have David's children, I try to plant seeds there, and I ask God to help me to plant these seeds in their life, because they don't have anybody else hardly doing it. if somebody's got to try, I talked to my pastor's wife recently. I was so discouraged about Sunday school, trying to get children to Sunday school. And she told me, she said, don't be discouraged about it. You do what you can do, and hopefully when they get older, they'll remember what you tried to do for them when they were young. But I just thank the Lord for my husband. I hope this will be fast. I don't want to run too long because I know we've been sitting here for a long time. But when I was very young, one night, I had known this one young man for a long time. I knew he played guitar, and he came by my house, and he brought Alan with him. And he told Alan, he says, you've got to see this pretty little girl I met. So they came in the house, and they were going to a job. And so they brought their instruments in. Now, I don't know how many people has ever been serenaded in their home before they go to a job, but I'd say not very many. But Alan brought his amplifier in, he brought his steel guitar in, and then this other young man brought his guitar in. And the other young man sang, I don't even know what he sang. But Alan sang a song. Alan sang,
I found my freedom.
no. He sang, man, I can't believe it. Blue Moon,
Blue Moon.
oh, Blue Moon, I saw you standing alone. He didn't really sing a lot back then, but he sang that song that night, and I'll never forget it. And then they left, and they went on to their jobs. They had another man playing with them that was an Indian. His name was Cherokee. But Alan was going to school. He was playing on the basketball team, and he would come by after school and visit with me and show me all of his schoolwork and different things that he did. But we did fall in love, and I have to say, you say love at first sight, but I believe that actually that I fell in love with him, and he fell in love with me. We really did fall in love with each other. And when we had Jimmy, and we didn't, I told somebody one time, I said, we had all these children, and we never even really thought about us having one right after the other, seemed like we would have the children. And if I was thinking, now, if I knew then what I know now, I hate to say it, but I would not have all the children. For one thing, the more children that you have, the more children you have, the more problems you have, but no, I'm talking about when they're young and they're growing up, there's a lot of things that can come from just having so many
Why did you
children.
do that to her? We used to call him St. James again. He was so good.
Well, we had our children. We had 5 boys,
21 years of age.
and we had moved to Tampa. And while I was in Tampa, my husband had a booking agent. He was booked in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was playing at a place with Jane Mansfield, who I think she's the one that was murdered. But anyway, he had to come. He went Atlanta. He had to come home that same night because I went into labor, and that was the night we had our little girl. And when we had that little girl, it was just like we had 5 boys, and then we had a little girl. It was like having a doll. That's what it was like. And my mother-in-law went out and bought me all these cute little dresses, and it was really just amazing. It was just that we had a little girl. And I would have to say that God had dealt with my husband a long time before he ever dealt with me. I believe God dealt with me because I asked the Lord one time, I said, Lord, why do you wait till we get into so much trouble before you call us? And the Lord just gave me an answer just so clear. And he said, I called you long before you heard, before you answered. I was calling you. So God does call us, and we look at people and we think, and we wonder if they ever get called by God, but they do. They do get called. You might not think God speaks to them, but God is a fair God in everything he does in judgment. But God was dealing with my husband, and he would come home and tell me things, and to me, I just, I didn't really know that much about anything. But he would come home and tell me stuff, and there was a young man named Billy Brown that had gotten saved. And Alan come home one day and he told me, he said, Joann, he said, Billy, I saw him today. Alan was working, at that time he was playing on weekends, and he was working at a place where you deliver things like to restaurants and motels and stuff like that. Anyway, he had walked into this place and Billy was testifying. And he said, Joann, he was testifying loud. He wasn't embarrassed by anything. Said he was telling how God had saved him. And it impressed me, but it didn't really impress me like it impressed my husband. Because God had been dealing with him for a long time. And so it was like 3 years later, we lost our little girl, but in the meantime, and Frances, this really good friend of mine, had invited me to go to church with her. And so I went with her, and while I was there, God did deal with me. I think I had been going, I don't know how many weeks it was, maybe 4 or 6 weeks, something like that. And God dealt with me and I got saved. And Alan's musician friends thought it was really, he said, they kept telling him, they said, if you keep hanging around your wife, because I quit going to clubs, said, if you keep hanging around your wife, you're going to get what she's got. And so, of course, it didn't bother him. But they would come over to the house and they would joke with me and follow me around the house because I'd quit smoking. They'd follow me around the house, blowing cigarette smoke in my face and everything. And because they thought they did not believe that I had quit smoking. But during that time, this is what I want to say, and I was telling Matthew. During that time in Daytona, God had moved a great deal. And there was a pastor at the Church of God, Whitechapel Church of God in South Daytona. And he was fasting and praying for a revival and for people to get saved in Daytona. And there was a bartender, not a bartender, I'm sorry, but a man that owned a bar and a nightclub. He got saved. Billy Brown had gotten saved. There was so many people where God had moved during that time, and they had come and really got saved. And then my husband, when I got saved, my husband would come to church with me, and he would make a deal with me. He would say, if you'll go to the movies with me, I'll go to church with you. So what I would do is I would go to the movies with him so that he would go to church with me. And he would try his best to get me to go to the club. He would tell me, he said, this is the only club you've never seen me perform in. But I just could not go. God had just put something in my heart that I just could not go to the nightclub. And my husband, he would come with me and he would argue and fight. And this one Sunday morning, he got up and he was picking. And I said, I didn't say anything. The best thing, I knew the best thing to do was just be quiet. And he started picking at Jimmy. Well, when he did that, I said, Alan, why are you picking at Jimmy? I said, Jimmy hasn't done nothing to you. Well, that's what he wanted. He wanted me to say something to him. And so when I did, he started screaming and cussing. He was very carnal. Screaming and cussing. Our windows were down. We didn't have an air conditioner. Of course, you got to remember how many years ago this was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
And he started screaming and cussing, and I started crying, and Frances came by to pick us up, and I did send the children out to go to church that morning, but I told Frances I wasn't going because I was so upset. But knowing what I know now, I should have went, but I didn't. But anyway, I told Alan that day, I said, Alan, if we don't do something together, both of us, I said, we won't have a marriage. And I knew we wouldn't. And the place he was working at was called the 5 o'clock Club. It was open till 5 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't know it, but every night my husband would leave about 9 to go to work. And as soon as he walked out the door, I would go fall on my knees and I would pray. And I would ask God to deal with him. And I didn't realize that God had given me a burden for him. And I told God, I said, Lord, if he wanted to open a club. I said, if he does that, I said, we will not stay married. And I've got children, and I don't want that to happen. And I didn't know, but all during this time, God was dealing really heavy with my husband. And I didn't know that God had given me a burden for him. Because every single night that he would leave, the first thing I'd do when he'd walk out the door was go fall on my knees and ask God to deal with his heart. But God he did a wonderful thing for us. The way he moved, there was just so many miracles, in our life where God moved. I could just ramble on forever and tell you what he did for us. With our children, and when my husband did get saved, it was it affected my boys so much until one day when there was some people working in our front yard and they were smoking a cigarette. And one of the boys, I don't remember which one it was because they were all young. I think Jimmy was 9 or somewhere around in there, and then all the other boys was younger. One of the boys went out and they told this man, they said, I know how you can quit smoking. They said, if you will come to church and if you'll sit with us up on the 3rd row, because we always sat real close, said, if you'll sit with us up on the 3rd row, and then when the altar call comes, if you'll go down there, then you will quit smoking. God will help you quit smoking. It affected the children so much. I just could not tell you how much that it affected our children when both of us got saved, but especially my husband. They just looked up to him. And you know what? I was always so glad that they looked up and held him up with such high esteem. I always was proud of that. I was so happy because I just felt like a father is so important in the home. And I felt like that if they lifted him up, how important it was going to be to their own life and what a good father it would make them. But there's just so many things I could tell you that God did for us. But how God moved for us. There was a young man, I told Matthew this, there was a young man, his name was Jimmy Jordan. When the night my husband got saved, he had a pack of cigarettes. He was a habitual smoker, one right after the other. He threw his cigarettes out the window on the way home. He came home and dumped a 5th of bourbon out down the toilet. He took speed, was a heavy speed user, and he dumped all those pills down the toilet, flushed them down. And it was just a miracle because one time I'd hid his pills and he almost tore the house up trying to find them. So I never did that one time. But, he saved him. He was saved. God saved him in such a miraculous way. And the next morning, I went down to my friends. Every morning I'd have coffee with her and we'd read the Bible together. And he walked out the door with me that morning to go down to my friends. And a milkman come up, and he testified to the milkman right away what God had done for him the night before. And then that afternoon, there was a young man came up named Jimmy Jordan, and he was a singer. And my husband started telling him what God had done for him, how God had saved him and everything, how he delivered him. And he told Jimmy, he says, Jimmy, I have a job coming up. It's in Miami. He said, you can have my band and you can have the job and you can just work with this booking agent. And Jimmy looked at him and the testimony was so good. Jimmy looked at him and he said, I don't want your job. He says, but I want what you've got. he saw such a difference in my husband. He knew my husband. He said, I want what you've got. And he went to church with us, and he got saved. And during that time in Daytona, in South Daytona, God moved. I just couldn't tell you how many deep sinners that had been really deep in sin, terrible sin.